Dear students, once again I would like to welcome all of you to a new session of the history class. Today we are going to continue with the same chapter, chapter number 4, second phase of the international movement, part 3. As I have already told you, we have divided the chapter into a number of parts, and today we are going to see the third part of the chapter. Before we move into the main topics, let's recollect some of the points which we have already studied in the last class. In the last class, we were studying about the impact of the anti-partition movement and Surat split of 1907. Under impact of the anti-partition movement, there we have seen a number of points, especially there we have studied about boycott movement and Swadeshi movement. So I hope you have studied those parts very well, those important points very well. And again, one another important event in the history of the International Congress, that is Surat split of 1907. There we have seen what were the main reason behind the split in the Congress. The main reason behind the split was because of the disagreement over the president candidate of International Congress. So we have already seen those points in detail. So I am not going to discuss those points once again, but rather we are moving to the next part of the chapter, and the main points which we are going to discuss today, the points which we are going to deal with today is the assertive phase of nationalism or the assertive nationalism, and the second point we will be discussing about the causes for the rise of assertive nationalism. So these are the two different points which we are going to discuss today. Maybe you might be hearing this word, especially this particular phrase, assertive nationalism, for the first time in your history studies. But you may be very familiar with the other phase, that is early nationalist or early nationalism. So assertive nationalism and early nationalism can be considered as the two sides of the same coin, because the disagreement between these two groups of people in the Indian National Congress led to the split in the Congress, and that particular split is being known as Surat split 1907. So firstly we are going to study about the assertive nationalism, the assertive phase of the Indian national movement. So let's move to the topic. Assertive phase or assertive movement of Indian national. Assertive nationalism started to spread in Indian National Congress from 1905. You have to note down this particular date. Actually, the split in the Congress or the Surat split of 1907, actually it had taken place in 1907. And assertive nationalist leaders started to grow, or they have got their own exist in the history of Indian National Congress from 1905. And they were remained as a very rigid and powerful group in the International Congress till 1918. And in between this period of time, a young group of leaders have got a very different ideology and outlook to attain the freedom of India. And those ideologies are being known as, or those period of time is being known as assertive nationalism, or those members or those leaders are being known as assertive nationalists. If you are explaining it further, a young group of leaders who were having very different outlook, and very different outlook, what was their outlook, that we have to understand. They didn't agree with the methods and ideologies of early nationalist leaders. We have already discussed in the previous class the different methods followed by the early nationalist leaders. They were following 3 P's. I think you might be remembering in the previous class I have explained it. 3 P's means petition, prayers and protest. These were the 3 different methods followed by the early nationalist leaders. But in the case of assertive nationalist leaders, they were not happy with these simple methods adopted by the early nationalist leaders. They have demanded something else, or they have expected something else in order to achieve their goal. Their goal means the freedom of the country. So that's why they were not ready to agree with the methods and ideologies of early nationalist leaders. So this group of people were being known as angry young men, because their methods were not always peaceful measures or peaceful method. So that's why those people were having something like a boiling blood they were having. So those people were being known as angry young men. So these people were trying to achieve the freedom through some other measures or some other methods, and by using some other ideologies which were not used by the early nationalist leaders. So that's why these people have got a very different ideology. They became a different stream in Indian National Congress. As a result, during 1907, when the Surat session of the Indian National Congress was going on, they have got two different opinions. As a result, two president candidates came forward, one from early nationalist leaders and the other from assertive nationalist leaders, and finally it became a big clash between both the groups. So that's why the Surat session in the history of Indian National Congress is being considered as a very bad event in the history of Indian National Congress. So Surat split took place just because of the two different ideologies and two different methods of these assertive nationalist and early nationalist leaders. Then let's come to the other point. They stood for complete Swaraj. In the case of the aims of the early nationalist leaders, in the previous class we have already studied, they were demanding for a government which is under the British. That means Indians will be ruling India, but at the same time all the higher officials, all the higher authorities will be controlled by the British, or a ruling system under the Britain. That was the demand of early nationalist leaders. But here the assertive nationalist leaders, they have demanded for complete Swaraj or complete freedom. That means India should be ruled by Indian, not some foreigners. So that's what they were having about the freedom, the ideology which they were having about the freedom of our country. And they demanded for self-reliant methods. They were having their own methods. In the upcoming part of the chapter, we will come to know what were the different methods they have followed, or they have put forward, they have introduced to achieve their goals. And some of the methods which they have followed, it was something like some violent measures or violent methods. But at the same time, they have followed certain peaceful measures also, or peaceful methods also. So self-reliant methods they were having. Then they wanted to have mass participation, because they were knowing very well, with a small group of people, they are not going to earn, they are not going to gain anything with regard to the nation or for the nation. So they wanted to have mass participation. So that's why their main aim was to give message to even up to the grassroots level of the village or the country. So that's why even from the village also people will be participating in the international movement, and it will help the people of India or the leaders of Indian National Congress to get success in their aim. So these were some other specialities of this assertive nationalist leaders. Their ideologies were something entirely different from early nationalist leaders. Again, we are going to see some other important points about assertive nationalist leaders. They were having a very different outlook, because their visions and their aims were something entirely different from early nationalist leaders. So it was one another speciality of these assertive nationalist leaders. Active resistance to British government. In different course of time, the British government has implemented different number of rules and regulations. In different field, like maybe in the field of business, or in the field of agriculture, or in the field of trade, or in the field of education, or in the case of social, religious factors, political factors. So in different field, British government made a number of rules and regulation. They implemented number of acts, like Vernacular Press Act. So number of such acts and some number of rules and regulations they have implemented. And these people, these assertive nationalist leaders, they were very active to resist against the British government on their decisions with regard to our country. And again, they condemned British rule, because they have revealed the real nature of the British to the people of India. Actually, early nationalist leaders were expecting that the British people will do something justice to the people of India. They will show some justice. They will show some mercy towards the people of India. And the British people were always saying that we are doing something, and if we are doing something, it is for the people of India. But the Indians were not able to see any kind of any kind of outcome from the activities of the British. So there itself the people of India, especially the learned, educated leaders, when we were discussing about early nationalist leaders, we have seen they were from educated and middle class families. They were from educated middle class. So that's why they were knowing all the facts very well. So they have revealed, they disclosed the real nature of the British to the people of India. So that's why people, they came to know what is the real face. The British, they are living in India just for money purpose, just for their economic purpose, benefit. So they have disclosed, the assertive nationalist leaders have disclosed this information or this ideology, these ideas to the people, the real nature of the British to the people, and through that they have condemned the British rule. Because if India is going from bad to worse condition, it is just because of the British, because British people are ruling our country. So that's why they have condemned the British rule. Then again, British rule as responsible for India's downfall. So right now I have told about it. If once India is going from bad to worse, who will take the responsibility? British has to take the responsibility, because they were ruling our India or our country during that time. So these leaders, there are all the different press releases, different notices and different gatherings, meetings, and everywhere they were blaming the British for the downfall of India. So that was the next point. And the last point, they asked the Indians to make sacrifices for their country. And the assertive nationalists, they were having a very young blood. As a result, they have demanded to the people, if you are ready to sacrifice your life, they asked the people to sacrifice their life. If you are ready to go for a bloodshed, we will get freedom. If you are ready, we will get freedom. So they asked the Indians to make sacrifices for their country. Sacrifice just doesn't mean that it is only with regard to life. You have to die for your nation. It doesn't mean, sacrifice doesn't mean that you have to die for one person has to die for his country. But rather than that, it has got a wide meaning, like if you want to serve your nation, you just quit your job under the British administration. If you are a teacher, please don't go to school for teaching, the school which run by the British. If you are a lawyer, please don't go to the court. If you are an employee in any sector under the British, please don't go for your work. So if it is with regard to your profession, again business, please don't do any kind of business with the British. If you are a farmer, you should not produce anything for the British. So any sector of the society, any group of the people of the society can make contribution to the Indian national movement by making some kinds of sacrifices. It doesn't mean that he has to sacrifice his life itself for the country. So these were the some other points with regard to about the assertive nationalist leaders. Now we are going to see some of the prominent leaders of assertive nationalism or assertive nationalist leaders. These are three important. When we were studying in the third chapter, and when we were studying third chapter, there we have seen three important personalities. I hope you might be remembering. Can you recollect those who were those leaders? Yeah, Surendranath Banerjee, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Dadabhai Nauroji. These were the prominent or important leaders of early nationalism. Now when we come to the assertive nationalism, here these are the three important personalities or the leaders of assertive nationalism: Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Bipin Chandra Pal. So these three people were having a very different ideology, very different outlook, very different methods to achieve their goal. To achieve their goal means to achieve the freedom, to gain the freedom of our country. So please remember these three important personalities: Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Bipin Chandra Pal. Now we are going to see the main causes behind the rise of assertive nationalism, or what were the different causes behind the rise of assertive nationalism. So first we will see all the points at a glance. Recognition, first point, recognition of the true nature of the British rule. Second one, failure of the early nationalist. Third one, worsening economic condition, growing consciousness among Indians. Fifth one, need for mass action. Sixth point, influence of international events. Seventh one, growth of education and unemployment. Eighth one, ill treatment of Indians abroad. Ninth one, existence of a nationalist school of thought. Tenth point, repressive policies of Lord Curzon. And the last point, Partition of Bengal. Now we are going to see each point in detail. The first point, the first main reason behind the rise of assertive nationalist or assertive nationalism in our country, recognition of the true nature of the British rule. So let's see how the people of India realized the real nature of the British. Early nationalist leaders, through their methods like writing petitions, prayers and protests, all those methods, they have given the message, they exposed the true nature of the British to the people. And the people of India, they have realized the British rule is the cause behind the economic ruin and poverty in India. So for attaining this goal, early nationalist leaders are having a very important role, because they are the people who really exposed the real nature of the people to the British true nature of the British to the people of India. So once when the Indians, they realized it, how they will react, we know. Suppose just imagine we are not having food for a number of time, like we are not having breakfast, lunch and dinner. How we will feel? If we are not having, okay, but at the same time, if somebody is stealing it from us, forcefully somebody is taking away our food, what will be our reaction? How do we will feel? So that was the feeling of the people. Actually, the wealth, the economic structure, the economic security which we have in our country, it is being taken away by the British by using force. Let's see some of the political events which implemented by the British people in order to attain their goals. See, reduction of Indians from Calcutta Corporation. In the Calcutta Corporation, how many number of Indians were working? Their number has been cut short. Their number has got decreased. A number of people, educated people, became jobless, unemployed. And again, restrictions on press. That means Indians were not permitted to publish any kind of news against the British. So actually, because of these actions, because of this one, the people of India, they came to realize, so they realized, actually British people, they are not giving more freedom. Rather than giving freedom, they are taking away the rights of the Indians. So it was the realization of the people about the ruling system of the real nature of the British. Once when they realized the real nature of the British, they were having only one idea in their mind. If India want to get further growth, or India has to get development, British rule should be replaced by self-government. Self-government means the government which will be run by the Indians. So if India want to grow, or if India want to develop, British rule should be replaced by a self-government run by Indians. So that was the realization of the people of India. So we were seeing a number of points. Early nationalist leaders, their methods, they exposed the real nature, and a number of political events which took place in the history of India. All those points are finally coming to a conclusion that the people's realization, what was their realization? They realized if India want to get developed, British rule should be replaced by a self-government body which will be run by the people of India. So it was the real result by meant recognition of the true nature of the British rule. So this is the first point. Recognition of the true nature of the British rule is the first point behind the emergence of assertive nationalism. So in order to attain this self-government, that's why we have already seen one of their main ideology was Swaraj, complete freedom, complete independence. Purna Swaraj. So this is what was the main aim of the assertive nationalist leaders, because this is what was their reason, because they realized the real nature of the British rule, so they were ready to fight against the British, and for that they were ready to follow any measures and methods. Now we are going to the second point. Second point is failure of the early nationalist leaders. So early nationalist leaders, they have implemented a number of ideologies, a number of methods they followed, but it can be up to an extent it was a failure. Like assertive nationalist leaders, they criticized constitutional measures or methods which are followed by the early nationalist leaders. Assertive nationalist leaders criticized the early nationalist leaders. You know why it was criticized by assertive nationalists? There are a few number of reasons. Actually, the methods adopted by the early nationalist leaders, its result was so slow. So slow means how many number of time the early nationalist leaders might have written petitions to the British government. They were following constitutional methods. Constitutional methods means even now in our India itself we are following number of constitutional methods. We are not going for any kind of violence. We are not going to kill anybody. We are not going to hurt anybody. We are not disturbing anybody. We are making petitions. We are making a complaint in the police, and the police will inquire about it. If justice is for us, they will provide it. If we feel guilty, they will punish us. Constitutional methods. And the early nationalist leaders, they were following these constitutional methods. Petitions they were doing, prayers, agitations, protest. These kinds of methods they were following, and its growth or its outcome was very slow. And instead of that, assertive nationalist leaders or assertive nationalism told, instead of following these constitutional methods, we need to follow this Western or European revolutionary methods. We know different revolutions had taken place in different parts of the world. Russian Revolution, French Revolution. So number of revolutions, people have taken weapons in their hand. So they were not having any concern towards others. So assertive nationalist leaders told, it's not peaceful measures we have to follow to attain our goal. Rather than that, we have to go for some kinds of revolutionary methods. So they have criticized early nationalist leaders for the constitutional methods which they have followed. Second one, early nationalists, they were really loyal to the British government. As I have told, if British people, suppose I am making a complaint today to the Viceroy, the Viceroy will go through the complaint and he will say, okay, wait for 1 week, I'll let me go through it, let me study about it, and I'll give you a solution. After 1 week, when I go again, he will say, I haven't got time again, you come after 1 month, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. So these kinds of activities were going on from the side of early nationalist leaders. So that's why assertive nationalist leaders were not happy with the activities of the early nationalist leaders, because early nationalist leaders, all the different methods which they followed, it was constitutional. As a result, they were loyal to the British, because what the British says, they were ready to obey it. But instead they have put forward certain demands that we need freedom, or we need government, we need job, we need economic security. So these kinds of demands they put forward, but it was only through different petitions, agitations, prayers, requests, and rather than they were not ready to follow any kind of violence towards the British. So early nationalist leaders were really loyal to the British government, and there was an aim, and the aim to get more seats in central provincial legislature or judiciary seats. Early nationalist leaders were having an ideology to increase the number of representatives in the central provincial legislature or in the judiciary seats. That's why they were really loyal to the British government. And that was their aim. If they were loyal to the British, this is what they were having in their mind. Because if once the number of Indians are getting increased in the central provincial legislature, they can influence in making of rules and regulations for the nation. If once the number of Indians getting increased in the judiciary seats, again Indians will get justice. These kinds of measures and methods and ideology the early nationalist leaders were having. And the other main reason behind the failure of early nationalist leader, or a negative factor from the side of early nationalist leaders, all their movements were limited only to the middle class people. But as we have already seen in the previous part, assertive nationalist leaders were focusing for a mass movement. But early nationalist leaders, their activities, their ideologies, their all the different possibilities and activities were limited with middle class people. So it was one of the negative aspects from the side of early nationalist leaders. Then they got nothing substantial from the British government. When they were not getting their result, as I have told, what the result which they were getting, it was too slow from one side. At the same time, when they were not able to attain their aim, a group of people started to think something in a very different way, with a very different outlook. They have started to think how can they attain it in a different way. So it led to the formation of assertive nationalists. So we can say that up to an extent, failure of the early nationalist leaders or the early nationalism or the ideologies of early nationalism led to the emergence of assertive nationalism in our country. And the third point which we are going to discuss is about worsening economic condition. Already I have told you, economic structure is a main pillar of our nation or our country or any society. So once if people are losing that economic security, it will create a lot of problems. In the history, we can see or we can consider it as a very bad period of time for the people of India. From 1896 to the beginning of 19th century. Number of famines have taken place in different parts of the country. Almost 90 lakh peoples, they died due to the famines. But actually it affected the people or it influenced the people in a very different way. You know why? Because British government did nothing to help the people of India. But instead they were very busy in spending a huge amount of money to celebrate the silver jubilee of Queen Victoria's ascension to the throne. So they have celebrated that event, the silver jubilee of that. It was not even the assertion of the Queen to the throne, but rather than that silver jubilee of the assertion of the Queen to the throne. So for that celebration they have spent a huge amount of money, but they have done nothing for the people of India, to the people who were really or who were suffering due to the famines. So it was a very important event in the history. So people started to think about the real nature of the British. As a result, some other events took place in the history, like peasants, especially famine will be affecting the farmers, those who are working in the field, the farmers, the cultivators. So they became helpless and their economic conditions were moving from bad to worse. And the unjust and repressive policies of the British, all these together make or forced them to take a decision against the British. Peasants were already helpless, or they were helpless, and at the same time unjust and repressive policies of the British which they enforced on the people of India. And the peasants were economically they were moving from bad to worse. So in such cases people started to think against the British. So that's about the worsening of economic conditions led to the emergence of assertive nationalism. Now we are moving to the fourth point, and the fourth point is growing consciousness among Indians. Indians were ready to go for a different way of thinking. They started to think differently. Let's see how they helped the people to achieve their goal. Nationalist writers and agitators. So already British people have banned the use of newspapers or the Vernacular Press Act. I hope you are remembering it. By using those kinds of act, they have made a big check to the publishing of news against the British. At the same time, Indian leaders, they were not worrying about the British. They were going on publishing news and they were writing against the British. And they blamed, in their writing, they always blamed the British rule for the cause of poverty. Because if poverty is there in India, they blamed British for that. And the leaders, the nationalist leaders, they have charged the people with self-respect and self-confidence. They prepared the people with self-respect and self-confidence. That's why people were ready to follow any of the instructions told by their leaders. And again, they asked Indians to rely on the abilities of the Indians, because Indians were, they charged the people, they urged the people to fight against the British. And the main reason, the main factor which they have told was, Indians are really special. Once if they started to react, the British may not be able to stop them. And by using such kinds of boosting words, they charged the people and they were ready to fight against the British. So it led to the growing of consciousness among the Indians. Indian people, they got self-confidence and self-respect towards their mother country, and it enabled them to fight against the British. So that's about the fourth point, growing consciousness among Indians, how it led to the emergence of assertive nationalism in India. Now we are moving to the next point, point number 5, reason number 5 behind the emergence of assertive nationalism. Need for mass action. The leaders were knowing with a small group of people they are not going to achieve anything, because they have learned it from the First War of Independence 1857. Different events took part in different parts of the country, but the British people suppressed it. So that's why assertive nationalist leaders, they were knowing that with a small group or just a middle class families or middle class of the society, they are not going to help in achieving the goal of the nation. They have a very clear idea in their mind. If India want to be free from the British, it will be possible only through mass movement. Let's see, those points are coming. Remedy for the condition lay in their own hands, like what had happened in the Russian Revolution. The leader told the people, give me blood, I will give you freedom. Be ready to sacrifice your life for the nation, and the nation will help you to achieve your freedom. So same way here, the leaders charged the people. They encouraged the people by saying that the remedy for your problem, poverty is your problem. The remedy is also in your hand, lay in your own hand. And what you want to do? You have to fight for the nation. The leaders asked the people to have self-belief and self-respect. If they have self-belief, if they have belief in themselves, it is enough to achieve their goal. It is enough to defeat the British. Self-respect. You respect yourself. If you respect yourself, you will respect others. So if there is self-belief and self-respect, you can achieve. So just one person or a small group is not enough to achieve the goal. So that's why what the leaders told, this self-belief led masses to the freedom movement. So once a person started to believe in himself, that he can contribute something, as I have told, sacrifice doesn't mean that one person has to give away his life for the nation. Sacrifice doesn't mean that it is just life. Any kind of sacrifices can be. Maybe time, maybe money, maybe power. So anything can be contributed. So that's what meant by sacrifice. So here a person who is having self-belief or a belief in oneself, and that person can never defeat it. That's why those self-belief people, they were ready to join the mass freedom movement. So finally what had happened? Mass sacrifices needed to win freedom. People realized in the history of India also, we have seen a huge number of sacrifices done by the people of India. Wagon tragedy. Even number of leaders who had got executed, who has got sentenced for capital punishments, who had sent behind the bars. So all those people were ready to sacrifice because they were having only one intention in their mind, that's about the freedom of the nation. So they told the people mass sacrifices needed for the winning of freedom of our country. Now let's move to the next point, reason number 6, influence of international events. Already I have told you a few number of events, Russian Revolution, then French Revolution. So at the same time, in different parts of the country, so many number of countries were fighting against the British and their colonies, because those countries were suppressed under the British. At the same time, in India also, they came to know about those kinds of movements which are done by the different countries, and those people got freedom from the British as well as from different other countries. So here itself you can see a number of examples. Japan defeated Russia. Again, Italians were defeated by Abyssinians. Then Ireland fighting for home rule. So all these. Then at the same time, assertive nationalist leaders thought, if a person is having self-belief, it is enough that the Europeans could be defeated. That means if a person is having belief in himself, and if the leaders are able to collect such a huge crowd who filled with self-belief, they can definitely throw the Europeans out of the nation. So influence of international events helped for the emergence of assertive nationalism. Now we are coming to the seventh point, and the seventh point is growth of education and unemployment. During this time, during the formation of early and assertive nationalism, nationalism and assertive nationalism, there were a huge number of people who got education. So number of educated Indians increased, who got education even from abroad. Even you can see when we check the history, or while we go through the history, we can see a number of leaders who got good education from different foreign nations. Jawaharlal Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi. If you take a huge number, if you take a list of those educated Indians, we can see it is numberless. So such a huge number of people were there who were really qualified, educated, and those educated Indians were working under the British or working for the British in a very low salary. Just imagine if a well qualified person is working for a very low salary, what will be his inferiority feeling he will be having, or other words, the grayness, the pain. I have qualified, I am an educated person, but still I am working for such a low salary, means it will create a kind of stress and struggle in the life of that person. So they have started to think. Some unemployed people, they have thought of fighting against the British. They were educated and they thought of giving their talents, their knowledge, their capacities and capabilities for organizing people and to educate them and enrich them with the nationalist feeling or nationalism feeling towards one's nation. So they were ready to work as volunteers for the bringing up all the different people from different sectors of the society to fight against the British. So growth of educated people, because they were knowing all the different, suppose just imagine a person who know how to read and write, what all services he can do. He can teach others to how to write and read. So slowly people will come to read the press release or the news which is published, the news which is being published by the Indians, or a person who is reading out all the news, what is there in the newspaper for the people who do not know how to read. So different services they could provide to the society. So actually they were doing it. And this number of unemployed educated people, or the educated people who were unemployed, they were contributing their maximum to the society. So it was a big threat for the British, and it is one another reason behind the emergence of, or the rise of, assertive nationalism in India. Seventh point. Now we move to the eighth point, and the eighth point is ill treatment of Indians abroad. Indians were not being considered as even humans in different parts of the world. And some of the examples are like what was happening in Africa when Mahatma Gandhi was there. We will see some of the points with regard to that. Indians helped the British to conquer colonies in different parts of the world. You might be thinking how it is possible. We have already seen in the previous part of the class, Indian soldiers were being sent to different parts of the world. They were sending to different parts of the world to serve British in order to capture different parts of the world, or to make colonies in different parts of the world. So Indians have made such a number of huge contribution to the British, and with the help of Indians they have made a lot of money. But they were not being considered as even equal to British. Not even equal to British, they were facing a lot of discriminations. And the best example, what was happening in South Africa, because Indians had played a great role to in capturing South Africa. So that's why South Africa became a colony of the British. But even those people who had rendered such a wonderful service to the British were not treated properly by the British. They have faced a lot of racial discrimination. No rights to vote. No right to vote. Again, no entry to hotels, clubs, buses. So everywhere they have faced a lot of discrimination. Even in the case of Mahatma Gandhi, what had happened we know. When he was traveling in the second class train compartment, what was happening, or what had happened? Even he was having the ticket with him, the European who entered in the cabin or entered in the compartment kicked him out of the compartment by saying that you are not permitted to travel in a second class compartment with a European. So these kinds of discrimination was going on everywhere in South Africa. So this made a kind of, it was protested by Indians and led to the rise of assertive nationalism. So all these were being suppressed in the heart or in the minds of the Indians. Once they have got a chance, all these things came out naturally. So it led to the emergence or the rise of assertive nationalism. That's about the 8th point. Now we move to the 9th point, that is existence of a nationalist school of thought. Nationalist school of thought doesn't mean that it is something like a normal school where students are going to school and learning. It's not something like, but rather than that, it is a group of intellectuals who are having a very clear vision about the future, and they communicate it with the different people, and slowly it will spread. So a well planned group of people who were having a very good vision about the freedom of the nation. So their ideologies, and they are making a structure, a schema, and the schema will help the people to follow, and if the people are following those ideologies of these intellectuals, they can really achieve their goal. So these kinds of ideologies or thought about the freedom, nationalist thoughts, were being given by a number of intellectuals, and their existence in the country, though they existed in the country, and they helped for the further growth of nationalism in the country, like Ashwini Kumar Dutt, Vishnu Shastri, and they, not just two, but a huge number of peoples are there. Some other prominent leaders like Lokmanya Tilak, Bipin Chandrapal, then Aurobindo Ghosh, and Lala Lajpat Rai. So if you take the numbers of those leaders who were from the nationalist school, so we can see that their contributions or their contribution to the national movement, it cannot be measured by using any kind of measurement. So it was one another factor which led to the beginning of assertive nationalism. Then again, personal sacrifice is necessary for freedom. Suppose if somebody is calling me to join the international movement, I am saying that right now I am busy with my office, so I will join you after 5 o'clock. Once my office time is over, I will come and join. So for me, my national movement or the freedom of my nation is second priority. My first priority is for my job. And if I have, suppose, or in one another example, if somebody is approaching me to ask a help to join the national movement, I'm saying that okay, up to 5 o'clock I have my office duty, then after 5 to 7 o'clock I have my some duties with regard to responsibility with regard to my family. I have to go for some shopping, I have to purchase some things. So then I come. So my third priority is for my nation. My first priority is for my job, then it is for my family. Then there comes the nation. So personal sacrifice doesn't mean that, as I have already told you, it's not something like contributing or offering one's own life. Rather than that, it can be anything. Time, money, job, anything can be considered as sacrifice. But they told personal sacrifice is needed. Your first priority should be for your nation. So that was the another important point with regard to the nationalist school of thought. Then again, these leaders, these early assertive nationalist leaders, especially the nationalist school of thought, those leaders have declared Swaraj as the goal of national movement. It's not something like a government, an imperial government which functioning under the British, or a government which function in a colony. Because if the British people will remain in India, means India will remain as their colony, and the government which will be functioning under the British may not be able to take any kind of action, because British will control even then. So that's why they have declared Purna Swaraj or Swaraj as the goal of national movement, and they have worked hard to achieve this goal. This nationalist school of thought, or the members or the leaders who were having the very clear strategy and schema to achieve their goal, they really worked hard to achieve their goal. Now we move to the 10th point, and the 10th point is repressive policies of Lord Curzon. We have already heard this name once when we were beginning, or when we were in the beginning of this chapter. Lord Curzon, who the mastermind behind the Partition of Bengal. So repressive policies, certain policies followed by Lord Curzon, it also led to the formation of assertive nationalism. Let's see what were his main ideologies. Lord Curzon has introduced a number of or many repressive policies, and one of his ideology was that he never considered India as a nation, because for him India was not something like a nation. It is something like a group of ethnic group it was not a nation, because those qualities considered for a nation were not there with India, or India was not having any of those qualities which a country was having. So he never considered, in his view it is, I am saying it is in his view, so that's why he never considered India as a nation. He was in favor of giving freedom to Indian, because he had the belief that the British were destined to rule over India. He was never thinking about giving freedom to India, because he believed that British people took birth, or it's a responsibility of the British to rule India. If a British person had taken birth on this earth, his responsibility is to, or his first and foremost responsibility is to rule India. So these kinds of very rigid, very narrow minds he was having, and that's why he has introduced certain policies, some repressive policies. Let's see some of the policies introduced by Lord Curzon. In 1898, he has introduced an act, offence to provoke people against British. That means, as per this act, if a person is provoking people against British, or if I am making a very long speech against the British, and that's why the audience who were listening to me, they got charged and they started to fight against the British. So that means I considered as a traitor, because I am not ready to follow the rules and regulation of the British. I am not loyal to the British. I am not loyal to the British. So provoking people against the British considered as an offence. So it was an act introduced by Lord Curzon in 1898. Again, in 1899, Calcutta Corporation Act. We have already seen, because of this Calcutta Corporation Act, a number of people lost their job. So reduced the strength of elected members from India and giving majority to the British. Actually, early nationalist leaders were thinking that by appointing more Indians in these kinds of legislative councils, it can change the different events which were happening in India. But actually, because of this act, Calcutta Corporation Act 1899, as per this, the number of Indians reduced in the corporation. So it was one another act introduced by Lord Curzon. Then again, Official Secrets Act. Any action which involves helping an enemy of the state will be against India. Which means, if I am helping a person who is already working against British, so for the British he is an enemy, and I am helping him, and the British people will be considering me also as an enemy against the state. That means against India. Actually, the people who are working for the freedom, they will be considered as an enemy against India. So these kinds of some very crooked act it was actually, which introduced by Lord Curzon to suppress the people. Then again, Indian University Act 1904. Strict official control over Indian universities, because it was the center of nationalism. Because young people are getting attracted to nationalism very fast. So that's why the British people, they tried to control the universities by implementing the Indian University Act 1904. And they tried to control the people, the young generation, because if one young generation is not getting charged or boosted by the nationalist ideologies, then there is no threat for the British. So that's why they have made such kinds of rules and regulation against the universities. So these were some of the policies adopted by or introduced by Lord Curzon to suppress the national movement. So it is about the 10th point which led to the emergence or the rise of assertive nationalism in the country. Now the last point, 11th point, that is of Partition of Bengal. We have already studied about Partition of Bengal, what were the different events which took place, what was the reaction of the people, what were the consequences of the for Partition of Bengal, what was the methods used by the people who had taken part in this strike or movement against the anti-partition movement. We have already seen all these topics. So the 11th point behind the emergence of assertive nationalism was because of Partition of Bengal. And the Partition of Bengal, after the Partition of Bengal, we have seen one more point, the Surat split. So in 1907, when the Surat session of the Congress was going on, the group of the entire members of the Surat or the Indian National Congress, they were into two different groups. So it was because of this Partition of Bengal. Partition of Bengal took place in 1905, and the mastermind behind this partition was Lord Curzon. When he divided or when he introduced this ideology, he had to set a reason. So from the side of the British, he told the reason, or from British people or the Lord Curzon justified it. The partition is for the administrative convenience, because Calcutta or the Bengal was a very large province which was very posh and very rich region, because we have already seen the Bengal was very near to the coastal area, very near to the sea. As a result, it was flourished with the business were flourished everywhere in those regions. And even the Calcutta, we know even in this present period of time what important Calcutta is getting in our country. So they have told it's for the administrative convenience, but actually it was not the real reason, actual reason. The intellectuals who worked behind this partition were having a very different ideology. They were having a hidden idea, and it was to make division between Hindu and Muslims nationalists. And Bengal was Calcutta was the center of the nationalism. So by dividing this country or by dividing this province into two, they can divide the people into two different groups, Hindus and Muslims. And we have already seen in the previous class, they were very famous for the unity between Hindus and Muslims of Bengal. So they were trying to divide the people on the basis of this secular feeling. So to make division between Hindus and Muslims nationalists. So slowly people will lose the leadership and that's why they thought that the national movement will come to an end. But actually it was not a right decision taken by Lord Curzon, because there was a reaction from the side of the people, reaction to the partition, widespread protest and agitations. People, they came to the street to fight against the British. They forgot everything. They were ready to sacrifice anything for the nation. So widespread protest and agitations against the British introduced boycott and Swadeshi movements. We have already seen what were the consequences of the anti-partition movement. In the previous class we have already seen. So introduced boycott and Swadeshi movement, and again reaction from the side of British also had taken place, because when people started to strike against the British, they won't just become audience by seeing and simply sitting. Okay, instead of that they also reacted, used several repressive methods, and then disregarded the public opinion. So these were some of the reaction from the side of the British. So with this, my dear students, we are just winding up today's class, and I know it was quite a lengthy lecture, but what to do, these 10 points, if I am not explaining at a glance, you will lose the continuity of the class. So that's why I have explained this one topic under or in one class. So I hope you will be able to understand it properly. If once you are not understanding it, you revise the video once or twice or thrice, definitely you will understand it. I have explained all the points very well, and still if you have some doubts, just go through your textbook, just read the portion what is given there in the textbook, and still if you have any doubts, you can contact me personally and I will clarify your doubts, and we will continue our classes tomorrow. And still then, thank you.